Well, I want to say a welcome and a Chag Sameach. We are at the end of Israel's Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, and especially since we are in this unique occasion, I thought it would be an opportunity to make the Yom Ha'atzmaut connected to us by doing something that wanted to do for a long time, which is to not only hear but actually begin recording Rina's stories about Israel, which have been so much a part of her teaching to generations, I think we can say, of students, not only at Beit Avraham, but in other places in our area. I would just say by way of introduction that I was thinking about this, and some of you who were in shul, so to speak, a few weeks ago may have heard me say this, that Rina, as I remember it, launched her teaching career in 1956 when she was a teenager of, maybe you'll correct me, 16 years, in a training program for teachers in Israel. And in 1956, the war broke out. It was Israel, a very short war, Israel and Britain and France against Egypt. And Rina was pressed into service as a teacher and sent out, and suddenly had to begin her profession under unique and different circumstances. You're reminding me it was a Yemenite community, and Rina is not Yemenite. And I was thinking about that as here Rina, in what is certainly not the end of her career, all of a sudden, when things changed here, had to learn how to become an electronic teacher, and adapted in a very short way, which a whole other conversation. She doesn't love it, none of us do, and yet here she is. So anyway, my hope is that this is really the beginning of what might be many, many hours of recorded conversation. So happy to have with us too Atara, and I think Bob I saw earlier, at least Andrew also from the family, and maybe more people have joined us from the Mishpacha too. I've muted everybody but Rina, and but there is a chat if you know how to use it, and if you have questions along the way you want to put in there, you can feed them. At some point we can open up microphones too, but I'll know that you want to ask a question, or I'll ask it on your behalf. So without further ado, Rina, I want to just start with the beginning in Israel. How did you get to Israel?
Well, I'll start a little before that. In order to immigrate to Israel, my parents, after the communists came to Romania, in order for us to be able to emigrate, my parents had to register with the Communist Party and go to all kinds of meetings. And they were hoping that all those that were initiated in the Communist Party will go to Israel and spread the word. And after a couple of years of having to go to meetings, we finally got the visa to be able to go to Israel. And we had to leave everything behind. We got a list what we can take with us. For example, 1 pair of shoes, 3 pair of underwear, 2 dresses, 3 pair of socks. We couldn't bring any money, and certainly no jewelry. And we were put on a ship that was actually a cargo ship in which they put bunk beds, and they stuffed us in there like sardines. And it was December, and the sea was very, very rough. And I remember everybody was sick to their stomach, and I was not, thank goodness. However, my parents made me sit on the top bunk and play the violin while everybody else was sick. And after a few days, we came to Haifa, and we were sent to a camp called Atlit, which is north of Haifa, I think. And we were put together in tents with other families. And we were there for quite a few weeks in that camp.
So Rina, this was December of 1948?
December of 1948, yes.
You said it was you said a couple year process. Were your family Zionists already, or what did you know?
After the Holocaust, every Jew was a Zionist. I remember, I don't come from a very, very large family. However, I do remember that from the entire family, on both sides of the family, only one cousin of my father was a communist, and he was not a Zionist. And everybody else wanted to leave as soon as they could, but it took a while. We came in 1948. My uncle and aunt on my mother's side, my mother's sister and son, came in 1952 with my grandfather, Eli. Unfortunately, he passed away in the port of Haifa. Didn't get to see Israel, but he was buried in Israel.
So when you got to Atlit, was that with everybody on the same ship, or were you sent to different places?
We were, I can't really remember. I was only 8 years old, but I know that we didn't have the tent to ourselves. There was a mess hall, and they took care of us. They gave us blankets and beds, that mattresses that were stuffed with something that was not very comfortable. And I remember that they dug all around the camp to prevent we would hear every evening, we would hear cries. And we would think that the cries are maybe people that were in Masait, in trucks that overturned. And later on we learned that it was the jackals that were howling in the evenings. So they made around the camp so that they couldn't come through into the camp. They made dugouts all around the camp.
What about Hebrew language? Did you know Hebrew yet? What did you speak?
Oh no, nobody spoke Hebrew. Everybody spoke a different language. Where the people that we were with were also Romanian, and when we were finally given an apartment, it was with another family that were Romanian, and it was in an Arab. Well, you'll ask me, I'll tell you. I don't want to jump.
No, I'm just pushing you along so you can talk about anything. So.
Well, we were finally given homes, and those homes were in towns that were evacuated by Arab residents. And they could not afford to give a family of 3 2 rooms. So they gave us 1 room, and to the other family, with a Romanian family with a boy, they gave the other room. And there was a terrace. There was no, we had an outhouse. We did not have a bathroom or a shower. If we wanted to bathe, we had to go with pails to the water tower, fill in the pails and bring them home. You had to stay in line to be able to fill up your pails to carry them home.
Was this already in Lud?
That was in Lud.
Yeah.
I do have to tell you that many of the Arab residents ran away and they left everything behind. However, those who decided that they are going to stay were moved to a certain part of town, which we call the Arab ghetto. And they lived in their part of town, and all the rest of the town was given to emigres that came from every part of the world. I had friends from Bulgaria, Turkey, Morocco, every part of the world we had in Lud. And nobody spoke any Hebrew. However, there were a few Israeli families sprinkled among us, hoping to teach us little by little. And then they started opening schools. And that was quite an experience, not being able to communicate with anybody. Also, everybody was dressed in the outfits that they were used to be dressed in the country of origin. Indian Jews were wearing saris. Moroccan Jews were wearing those white pants. I don't know what you call them. And everybody was dressed differently, and everybody had different costumes. My friend Yael, which was from Morocco, came from a very, very large family. They used to sit around on the floor, and that's how they had their dinner. So it was very, very interesting to see how people lived differently in every part of the world.
Did you have a sense at that time that this was an unusual way to live, or you're just a kid? This is how we live.
It certainly was very unusual. That's not. I came from Bucharest, which was a very, very large town. We had gas. We had, we were able to cook. We had fireplaces. It was very, very different coming to Israel. It was like Little House on the Prairie. We didn't have electricity for at least 3 years. We didn't have running water for at least 3 years. And not being able to speak Hebrew, it was very, very hard for my parents, especially for my father, to find a job because he couldn't speak the language.
What did he do? What was his work before?
In Romania, he was a supplier of fabric and the decoration for army uniforms. When he came to Israel, he used to go to, like you go here to the unemployment office, he used to go every morning, stay in line, and they were given jobs wherever they could. And when the jobs were gone, they had to go return back home without having work for the day. I remember my father working at, something, now I'm very sorry that I didn't get, I have a collection of pictures that I would have loved to show you. My father looks like a convict with a big hammer pounding on rocks, breaking them up in order to make gravel to build roads. Then I remember another job that he had was in Mekorot, which was the department of putting pipes for irrigation. Large pipes to bring water to different towns. Then I remember another job that he had. He worked as a cook in an army base in Be'er Yaakov. There were many, many jobs. Years later, when I was about 12, my father managed to open a little dry goods store. And surprisingly, the owner of that building was an Arab that decided to stay in Israel. He owned real estate, and also he was the main supplier of petrol in Lud. So, those who chose to run left their homes. Those who that chose to stay build another life in Lud.
What was school like from day to day at the beginning, and then starting to learn Hebrew?
We had teachers that could speak Hebrew that evidently came to Israel before us. They were from Poland, they were from different parts of the world, and they started teaching us, and it was hard. It wasn't easy. I was very lucky. Languages come easy to me. Friends of mine that came from Slavic countries had a really hard time because their alphabet is so different than ours. Romanian is a Roman language, and the alphabet is. It was easy for me to learn English, and consequently, also it was not too hard for me to learn Hebrew. In that respect, I was fortunate. It was hard. It wasn't easy, especially on the grown-ups. My parents spoke Romanian at home or Yiddish. So I learned to speak Hebrew, I learned to speak English, I learned to speak Yiddish, Romanian. I picked up here and there different bits and pieces of different languages. My mother, bless her soul, knew how to sew, but she was not a seamstress. However, she started accepting work, and she became a seamstress, and somehow that helped us survive. My mother being able to sew and have some kind of an income, because my father's income was never assured. And I do have to tell you that from what I remember, prejudice was rampant in Israel. When it came to jobs and you had to stay in line to get them, Polish emigres got the peak of the Polish peaks of whatever was available. And then, unfortunately, last in line were Middle Eastern Jews like Yemenites and Moroccan and Tunisians. They were always at the bottom of the ladder.
Did you feel like, did you divide like between the Edot Mizrach, the Middle Eastern Jews and the European Jews, or was it?
Yes, there was a division. We did not. The children did associate. I had friends from every part of the world. The adults stuck to their own kind. My parents had Romanian friends. They had a couple of Hungarian friends, but it was mostly European Jews stuck with European Jews, Polish Jews, which were also European, stuck to Polish Jews. Everybody kept their own plan.
You mentioned on the way the violin and the ship and stuff. Did you keep the violin? Did you still play it as a?
I kept it. We brought it to Israel. Unfortunately, we could not afford to continue with lessons because there was no income to continue lessons. So I stopped playing the violin.
Now, was it a religious family that you came from?
My grandparents were. My parents, not as much. But my grandmother, on my father's side, was observant. I do not remember. My grandmother on my mother's side passed away young. I was around maybe 3 or 4 years old when she passed away. My grandfather on my mother's side, he was observant also. My parents, not so much.
So what was Shabbat and Chagim like in the house or in the town?
Well, I remember my parents went to temple. I remember in particular one year on Simchat Torah, my parents went to temple and I couldn't go because I had yellow janders and I was not supposed to go out of the house. And I was heartbroken because I used to love to go and have a flag with an apple on top of it. So they did go to temple.
Were there customs from the other kids you knew, like interesting Chag customs or Pesach or just foods you ate together?
Oh yeah, we definitely observed Pesach. We observed all the holidays in the house. I do have to say that my Bulgarian friends were less observant than we were. They did not go to temple and they did not celebrate as we did. Middle Eastern Jews, most of them were observant.
Was life from day to day as a kid when you were a little girl, was it mostly outside after school or in any?
Definitely. We had school clothes and play clothes. American kids don't realize how fortunate they are to have choices. We didn't have choices. We had maybe 1 or 2 outfits to go to school and 1 or 2 outfits to wear when you to play. So the moment we came home, we changed our clothes, changed our shoes, and out the door we went playing.
Like what was a game? What was the thing you would do? What's a game?
Well, I still have a reminder. One of the game was we used to make a circle on the ground and with a knife, throw a knife and cut into slices. It was who can conquer most of the land in the circle. And once I threw the knife and it hit a little rock and it jumped back and got stuck in my cheek. Then we used to play a jump, what do you call it in English? Hopscotch. Mm-hmm. We played hopscotch and we played baseball, but we didn't play it with a ball. We played it with a piece of wood that was kind of like sharpened on both sides. So when we put it down, it would not stay put and you would be able to hit it from the ground. Or we would make a ball out of stockings that were not good anymore. At the time, stockings, they used to run, and when they were not being able to be fixed, we used to make balls out of them and play with them like baseball. What else? We used to play rope, jumping rope, and I can't remember much else. At school we had to. At school we played games, different kind of games. During physical ed, we played Machanaim. I don't know, Eitan. How do you say Machanaim in English?
But I gotta open him up. Let's see if I can find it.
I don't know. It's like.
Is that handball?
Well, no. You had ball and you had to hit people with it, and
yeah.
Go out of the game.
Dodgeball, I think we call it.
Yeah, something like dodgeball.
Or Gaga, we call it. There's the Gaga also.
Okay. And then we had physical ed. But when I was in grammar school, I remember that every Friday, soldiers from the army came, and we had to wear a uniform, a khaki uniform, and they taught us how to climb rope. They taught us how to crawl very quietly. That they taught us how to throw a grenade. They took us to the army shooting range, and they taught us how to shoot a gun. And that was every Friday. And I could do everything. The only thing I couldn't do is climb a rope. You had to twist it around your foot and pull yourself up, and that I just couldn't do. But I was a pretty good shot. I was a very good crawler.
You were, Lud is not that far from where the Kav HaYarok was, right? Were you?
I was very close. I don't know where Kfar HaYarok.
No, well, the border with Jordan.
Oh no, that was close to Ben Shemen.
You didn't feel that you were very near.
Oh yes, we were miles, very, very close to the border. If we went to Yar Herzl, which was a big forest, and you climbed the tree, you could see right over the border of the Jordanian border.
Was there a fence or any kind of marking?
No, there was no fence. There was no fence. We just knew that we do not go over there. We cannot trespass.
Mm-hmm. Did you travel to Yerushalayim or to Tel Aviv, other places?
Oh, to Tel Aviv we used to travel. To Yerushalayim, not very often. It seemed like so far away. The roads were very different at the time. We didn't have the kind of roads and highways like we've got now. It was one highway here and one highway there, and Jerusalem seemed like going from here to New York or even further away.
What was in Tel Aviv at that time?
What was in Tel Aviv? It was very different. In Tel Aviv, there were stores, there was electricity, there was Shuka Carmel that I used to love to. It was an outdoor market that I used to love to go to Shuka Carmel. It was, to go to Tel Aviv was a treat. It was a big event to go to Tel Aviv. Now, buses, living in Lud, in the beginning, the buses only ran till about 7, 8 o'clock, the latest. And there were no buses on Shabbat. So if you wanted to go, you had to take a taxi, which was too much of a luxury. So it's very interesting. Ruth and I were talking once on a flight back from California, and she grew up in Rishon LeZion, which is really close to me, to Lud. And it was like two different countries. Her memories were so different than mine that you wouldn't think that it was the same country we came from.
You've talked, I think, about some of the tiyulim. Did the school, or was it later on when you were in high school to organize?
That was later on when I was in high school. One of the tiyulim that we went, and I came back, and it was my birthday, and I got a bicycle, which was a big, big deal at that time. I think I told you that one of the trips that we went up to Metula, and there were no facilities. There was no electricity, and we needed facility. And we saw a bunch of trees and we went over and we accidentally crossed the border into Lebanon. And the guides, our teachers, ran after us and grabbed us to come back.
You said there was a time when obviously at some point people began to really have Hebrew, and you said then there was electricity and things in town. Can you remember the transition of life when, as things modernized in those ways?
Well, it took a long, long time until we got electricity and running water. And mind you, even when I left in 1961, and I lived in Bat Yam at that time, we still didn't have telephones in the homes. When I lived in Lud, the only telephone was in my friend Edna's house because her father, which they were also Romanian, he was a doctor. And the other telephone was at the door, at the post office. So if you needed to call somebody out of town, you had to go to the post office to make a telephone call.
I have a question that was sent. Did you and your family have a feeling that you were part of something special, or was it just day-to-day survival, all consuming?
It was a feeling of being free and knowing that nobody will point a finger at us that we are Jews. It was liberating emotionally, knowing that everybody else was just like me.
Was that encompassing? I mean, you mentioned Sephardi, Ashkenazi. Was there a feeling at some point of a group we're all in this together?
Fortunately, even when I left Israel, there was still, it was not cohesive. European girls did not date Middle Eastern men and the other way around. When it came to dating and marriage, most of us stuck to our own kind.
Was there in terms of like especially I guess as you got a little older, was there any sort of culture in town? Was there music? Was there movie, film or plays? Yeah.
You want to hear about our movie? Okay. They put up a big tent and put benches in the tent, and they had a movie camera with film, which the movies were American movies, and there was by hand written translation from English to Hebrew of the movies. And the tent developed ribs in it. So many times we would sit on those benches and rain was pouring on us. Also, Middle Eastern Jews had a habit of coming with food to the movies, and they would have feasts at the kolnoa. Later on, they opened another movie house, which was on top of a building. They put a big screen and benches, and we saw films that way. And unfortunately, I acquired the habit of smoking because it looked so cool in the American movies. So I developed smoking, especially American cigarettes, because it was so elegant. And that was without my parents' knowledge.
What were the movie? Do you remember what any of the movies are, or who the movie stars were you saw?
There were all kinds of movies. I think I'm trying to remember if giant was something I saw there or here. Very hard to remember which movies, but they were American movies that you can still see nowadays. Old movies, but my cousin Michael, which through him I met my husband, his girlfriend used to write, translate on the film and handwrite the translation on the film strips, the translation from English to Hebrew.
How do you do that? Every single frame? I mean,
every single frame she used to write.
I think some of us, well, I will speak for myself and my generation, we have these pictures of Israel in the early days. We know about Ben Gurion and Moshe Dayan. And were there famous Israelis as you were growing up?
As a matter of fact, later on in life, after I was married, I had to go to the reserves every summer for a month. The first year, I went for a month in the reserves at an officer's camp, which was called Machane Dora. And I was there just like a secretary doing paperwork, doing nothing. The second year that I was in the reserves, I was at the Matkal, which is like the Pentagon here. And there were maps with pins and all kinds of things that I didn't understand. And there was a mess hall, and I did see Moshe Dayan.
Oh, right. There's a story at the end, I think, at some point related to that. Not that we're really going to end.
Yeah, that was that month that I spent in the Matkal gave me a really hard time when it was time for us to emigrate to Canada because I was interrogated to make sure that I will not divulge any secrets. And it took quite some time until I got the stamp, which allowed me to leave Israel and go to Canada.
By the way, people should just, if you want to, let's say, I can't see everybody all at once. There are ways to, I think, make some notation that I can see you or write in the chat if you want to ask a question or write a question down. But tell us something about high school, that when you were a little older.
Okay. High school in Israel, in Lud, was a luxury. Grammar school, we had grammar school up to 8th grade, and then we had high school. We didn't have middle school, not in Lud anyway. It was free to go to grammar school up to 8th grade. After that, there was a fee that had to be paid in order to attend high school. And my parents screamed and saved, and they managed to send me to high school. We started about 78 students, and they dropped one by one, and it became, the class became so small that we got together with students from Ramle, which was next door to Lud, and we had a high school together, which was called Tichon Rud Lamed, Tichon Lud Ramle. And I have a picture of the graduation that I should, if we do that again, I will make sure that I've got some pictures I can show you.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and I graduated from high school. We had to wear uniforms, and that was it.
Were there, was high school also Sofim and Tiulim and things like that, or?
Yeah, we had Tiulim. Sofim, I did not belong to the Sofim. I was in the Gadna, and when in high school, I don't remember if if it still continued or not. I don't think I did.
What is Gadna? Tell people what's Gadna.
Gadna is, I don't know how to translate it. It was training of youth to be able
That is like ROTC.
to be able to enter into the army, because everybody when you were in the 12th grade of high school, you were registered to enter into the army right after you finish high school. The only way not to go into the army, and you had to have the physicals and had to go through a lot of paperwork. The only exemption to not going to the army is get married.
You had you had to specialize in high school to pick a track.
We had the Megama Realit. Those were students that were good in math and planned having a career in like engineering, and then was Megama Humanities, for those of us who wanted to become teachers or other career in the humanities.
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned the 1956 war. What was the story there?
The story was that part of the time I was teaching in Israel. Everybody constantly listened to the radio, and when something happens, they announce by code. That's what I remember. To immediately go to where you are supposed to go, back into the army, to Miluim. Consequently, the teachers had to go. So there were no teachers that were able to teach. So they sent us, those of us that were planning to become teachers, they sent us to villages around Lud to fill in for the teachers. And then they send us to kibbutzim, because a lot of the members of the kibbutz had to go into the war, and somebody had to work the fields. So they sent my class to a kibbutz near Haifa called Mishmar HaEmek. And when I was on the kibbutz, I worked in the fields, picking tomatoes, picking, and it was hot, picking carrots. Then they send us, a tractor would come with a big platform, and we would sit on that, and we would go to the orange groves to pick oranges and grapefruits. And it was nice because we had the shade. However, we would come back all scratched up from the trees. Then they sent me to work in the kitchen, because every kibbutz has a mess hall, and the members come to eat in the mess hall. And I was working in the kitchen, and fortunately, it was the only building in the whole kibbutz that had air conditioning. And I was a good worker, and they decided to keep me there. So no more fields for me and no more orange groves for me. I was working in the kitchen. And I enjoyed that.
What was
some experience? It was wonderful.
What was the general experience of, I guess, sort of wartime and I guess of politics too? Were you interested in the news and the daily affairs or the politics?
Well, we listened to the radio. I didn't see a TV, only on screen at the movies, but a real TV I didn't see until 61, when we moved to Montreal. I didn't see a TV before that.
Mm.
So we listened to the radio, and that's how we got our news.
Were you interested? I mean, was there a sense of politics, the political parties or political leaders?
There were, but young people at the time were really not interested. Not in my time. We were not interested in the politics of the time. I remember I only voted once while I was in Israel. I was over 18 and I only managed to vote once.
And again, people feel free to jump in with things you want to ask. What was the social life like as a teenager? I believe at some point in there you met...
similar, maybe a little more poignant, is the holidays, Yom Ha'atzmaut and Sukkot.
Yom Ha'atzmaut was a big deal. We used to have a parade. We used to dance near the area, which is City Hall. There was a big, big open area. We used to dance all night near the City Hall in Lud. When I got a little older, my boyfriend, later my husband, who used to go to Tel Aviv, had the parades with tanks and soldiers. I understand they don't do that anymore, showing off our army. I think I'm right. I don't know, maybe Eitan will know more than I do.
You're correct. Yes.
They had big army parades in Israel on Yom Ha'atzmaut during the day, and then there was a dancing out on the streets at night.
And how about Lag BaOmer?
Lag BaOmer, when I was in school, we used to forage for wood and bring it to the center of our yard at school and light a big fire, bring potatoes from home and roast them. I want to tell you, when I went, the building in Lud where I went to school was a building, it was a few building, and that was a post of English soldiers that was evacuated when Israel was declared a state, and they left the building, and it was a beautiful building, and they made it into a school. And that's where my school was, where English soldiers used to live. Actually, not English soldiers, English officers.
How about like Shavuot? I had one Shavuot on a moshav or a kibbutz. What was it like in the city?
I can tell you how it was when I was growing up. When I was in school on Shavuot, we dressed ourselves in white sheets like a toga. We had baskets of fruits that we carried, stole from home. We didn't steal, we took from home. And we would parade on the Rehov Herzl, which was the main road in Lud. There was one main road, Rehov Herzl. And we had a parade for Shavuot. Then we would go to school and take all the fruits and vegetables that we have brought from home, take an open market, and our parents would come and buy back the vegetables and fruits, and the money that we made would go to Keren Kayemet Israel to buy trees and plant them on the mountains of Jerusalem.
That's right.
Hang on, I'm going to show you something, Rina, that was sent along. Oh, can you?
Oh my God, where did you find that?
Your daughter, Lauren.
Esther and me. My friend Esther. Oh, my friend Esther.
Very
She did not go to your friends in grammar school, but she was also a neighbor. She was from Bulgaria, and goodness, she didn't go to high school. She went into the army, and then she went to work, and she got married. And her father owned a bleach and vinegar factory in Lud. Her mother used to work in Tel Aviv as a nanny or something, and her mother was a beauty of Lud. She was just gorgeous. And from what I understand, what I found out later on when I came back to Lud to visit, that her mother got involved with somebody else, and her father committed suicide. When I was in Israel,
That's sad.
I went to see her. She owned a store in Bat Yam, and she had a multitude of children, and she was double
Multitude of children.
size. She was a pretty one, but life evidently was not as kind to her because she really looked old and unhappy.
Do you have any idea? Do you know where? Do you know where this was? It looks like cactuses and.
Oh yeah, that was in Lud, between Shikun Amidar, going to the Shikunim, between Lud and Shikun Amidar, which was also Lud, but those were buildings that were given or were bought very, very inexpensively by emigres. They were built especially for them. And that was on the way there. And I used to be able to take the sabras of those to be able to eat them. The fruit, the cactus pear has, I don't know, the cactus blooms and it has a flower, and the flower turns into a fruit. And the fruit is covered with little needles all over it.
In Israel, they like sell them on the street, sabras.
That's right.
Cactus flowers, cactus fruit.
Right.
It's like little stands, and they sell them, and they are prickly on the outside, and they like cut it open for you, and right on the street.
Right. But before that, we used to
flower.
Take our own.
On cactus, it flowers and becomes a fruit. Oh, okay. You know,
yeah, the flower becomes a fruit.
Yeah. That grows from a flower.
A can and cut out both ends, make a hole in the can in the middle, and kind of go fishing over the fruit and pull it down. And then we would roll it in the sand and beat it with branches, with leaves, until most of the prickles got off. And then we would peel them, then we would put them on ice, and then cut them and peel them and eat them. So I know how to do that. It was not easy, especially for my parents. It was really, really hard. However, I would not trade a moment of my life in Israel and the experiences and growing up and what I learned and what I felt growing up there. It was the most, there are no words for me to explain how it feels being able to have those memories. That brings me to the point of crying.
There
Hi,
is,
baby.
this is I know from being around and hearing the sounds out of your classroom that this is the tip of the iceberg, and that
oh yes,
so great to be able to do this.
There is so much to tell that actually Ruth told me that I should write a book because it was all news to her growing in Rishon LeZion. she did not experience what I experienced. She grew up in a home. By the way, her mother was Romanian also, but Ruth was a Sabra. She was born there. Rishon LeZion had electricity, they had running water, everything that I didn't have. So she suggested I should drive.
One thing that I found different is when you're a teenager, that social life in Israel as a teenager was a lot more vibrant than teenagehood here. I experienced.
Oh yeah. Well,
what was your experience as a teenager there?
We all, the most luxury that you had was a bicycle. But all our friends were within reach, either between riding the bicycle or walking. Lud was very, very small. All of Lud altogether was 20,000 toshavim. How do you say?
Residents, yeah.
20,000 people lived in Lud. And all my friends lived very, very close. And we didn't have a lot of entertainment besides the movies in the tent or on the roof of Histadrut. And we used to walk back and forth in Rehov Lut and window shop. They started opening a few stores. And that's what we did. And on Shabbat, I don't know if Rabbi, you would like to hear that. On Shabbat, there was a gathering place where you could take a truck.
What does Shabbat mean?
The Sabbath. Friday night to Saturday night.
And the truck would have benches.
I don't even know what they did.
And we would pay a certain fee and take a ride to the beach in Tel Aviv. And at a certain time, we had to meet again at the truck and we'd go back to Lud. And that was every Shabbat. And it was an experience. Later on, they started opening a couple of pools and the buses were more available. And I was a little older, so I was able during the summer to take the bus and go to the pool, where I met my cousin and my husband to be, and a group of older. My cousin Michael, his parents moved to Canada. They lived in Montreal. He was in the army and he couldn't leave. So consequently, he lived with us. Every weekend when he would have off from the army, he would come and live in our house. And even after he finished his army duties, he belonged to a group of young men and women that were much older than I was. And I was like the little sister to all of them. Now, my cousin Michael had the girlfriend that used to write the translation of the movies from English to Hebrew, and he wanted to spend time with her, and he trusted his friend Jacob, to keep an eye on me. And eventually, that keeping an eye on me became to be more serious as I got older, and eventually he became my husband. And that's how I met my husband, through that group of older friends of my cousin Michael that were supposed to be my older brothers and sisters.
So he continued to keep an eye on you.
Yeah, he sure did. And we had 52 years together.
Well, you have really transported us and given us just such a delightful celebration. It really is a celebration, and the gleam in your eye reaches across the screen. And you've really given us something to light us up too. So we are going to schedule, part 2 of however many, and we'll get this recording to you and your family certainly as soon as pretty much as soon as we push stop. We have our minyan now, so we're going to segue out. People have been walking into our space here, but we really will all say thank you. Maybe we'll, thank you so much. And,
thank you.
if you are rolling in, we have been finishing up talking to Rina Scharf about early years of the state of Israel. If you have been here and did not intend to join us for the evening prayers, we will. You're fine to step out. We'll take a moment. And
maybe next time I'll have a chance to tell you about going to the shuk with my father to buy chickens for Shabbat, and going to it's a whole story.
That's good. On purpose, we made it so we would have to come back.
Okay.